In this lecture, we will cover advanced topics in HTML5. Before watching this lecture, you should go through the lecture on the HTML basics. Without that, you might find some part of this lecture difficult to follow. In this lecture, we will talk about HTML structural elements, which are used to mark different sections of a document or web page. ARIA, which is standard to help people with disabilities, for example, impaired vision, and finally video elements, which with HTML5, the browser can support video natively without using any third-party plugins, which we discussed earlier. Okay, so the HTML structural elements, it essentially creates the skeleton of the page, and it does not include any meat, which are the content, and which is covered in the basic lecture. And it is important for content organization, and just as you creating the article, you would probably start with a title and its outlines before you actually fill in the details. And you have article without any title, sections, or spacing, and people will find it quite difficult to follow or understand. So the structural elements is really designed for machines or algorithms, for example, Google search engines. And as we discussed in the previous lecture, and currently SEO or search engine optimization is a big industry. They try to improve the page rankings in the Google search results. Basically, the further up in the Google search results, the more likely a page will be discovered, which is critical, for example, for a business web page. And with the HTML structural elements, it will make it easier for these algorithms to understand the page and as a result improve its ranking in the search result. As I mentioned before, the structural elements does not really change the visual appearance of a web page. So with or without these, the web page will look like more or less the same. And all these visual difference will be applied by using formatting using CSS, which will be covered in the next lecture. But also the formatting will be only possible if there is something they can format, and which can be a structural element or the content elements we covered in the previous lecture. Excuse me. And some of these structural elements has been in HTML for a long time. For example, the headings, and just as a document or a paper or an article you're writing, you have titles, section titles, maybe subsections, and these creates an outline for a document. And the headings or the HTML headings have the same role for an HTML document or web page. So it forms like a table of contents, and for a web page, especially for a long one. And you probably all know there are 6 levels of headings. Depends to form a hierarchy and allow you to organize information on the page. So these are H1 and H6. So H1 is top level, and H2 is this one level down. Sometimes could be the subheading of a page, and so on. So if we take analogy of a book, so the H1 is like the title of the entire book, the H2 are the titles of chapters, and H3 will be the title for each section, and goes on. So there are in total 6 of these levels, and usually people would not go to level 5 or 6, probably 4 levels would be enough. This is a very simple HTML document, and you can see it uses some headings. So there's H1, which will be the title for the entire page, and then you have two H2s, which are like section centers of the page. Okay, and if we open it in the web browser, it looks something like this. So you have H1, which is the title for the entire page, and two H2 level headings. Okay, by default, the headings are progressively smaller. So basically means H2 is smaller than H1, and H3 is smaller than H2, and so on. This is visually to help us as humans to see the different levels of heading. And one thing quite important is to choose the heading levels and based on content hierarchy. Say if that is the title of the entire page, use H1. Even the default font size might be too big, and you can always change that using CSS. Do not pick how big, or do not choose which heading levels you want. Depends on the text size. You can always change that with CSS formatting. Here, and the headings has a more important role to mark the hierarchical structure of or the outline of a page than its visual appearance. And in other words, correctly using the heading levels makes your page stronger semantically in terms of easy for the algorithms to understand. Search engine by default puts higher weights on your headings compared to other non-heading content such as paragraph. And as a result, do not overload a page with too many headings, and that would confuse an algorithm. And it's also important to use the heading levels consistently throughout the site. So always use H1 for the title of the entire page, and H2 for the next level down, and so on. So before HTML5, heading elements are the only ones you have to structure a document. And HTML5 introduced 4 new section elements, which are called article, aside, nav, and section. And these are used to mark the specific sections of a web page. Okay, to make things slightly more complicated, each section element can have its own level 1 to level 6 headings. We will explain this a little bit better or in more detail in the next few slides. Okay, let's look at a fairly simple but common web page, something like this. So you can say it roughly has 4 components, and these are a header and navigation bar, and a main content area, which is this part, and then a sidebar, and finally a footer. Okay, not all web pages have all these components. Some may have more, some may have less, but these are the 4 probably the most common ones. And the HTML semantic or the structural elements, you have 1 for each of these components. So you have head and nav for the header and navigation section, and then article and section for the main content part. The aside is used to mark a sidebar, and footer is used to mark footer. So the name itself is quite straightforward and easy to understand which part of the page they represent. Okay, and We'll see some examples later on, but I just want to repeat again. So these structural elements, it marks different sections, but does not change any formatting of the component. For example, marking something as a side will not automatically put that content to the left or right of a page. This has to be done in the CSS. So we'll go through each of these elements fairly quickly. So let's start with the header or the navigation part of a page. Okay, so most of the page would have a navigation bar on top. Some might be on the side. And these often include things like the logo of the website, the navigation links to either the main pages or sections, and sometimes even a search box. So this is the example. Let me see, where's the mouse? Okay, yeah. So you have the header, and inside the header, you could have your navigation bar, and maybe say logo or search box as well. And do not confuse this with the head section of a body. As we discussed earlier, the head section will be before the body tag, and it includes the meta information about page, such as the language, etc., etc. So that's called header. Head without the ER, and this is called header. And if we open this example, you can see it just looks like this. That's a bit small. Okay, so essentially it's just a bullet point list, nothing too special. And just by looking at it, there's no way you can tell whether it's just a normal bullet list or is that part of the navigation. But when an algorithm reads this page, for example, the Google search crawler, it would understand that these are the main links for navigation purposes because of the header tag. Okay, and not every single page need to have a header section. This really depends on the design of the web page. Sometimes only the level 1 to 6 headings will be enough. And some pages can have more than one header. So if we look at this example, this is a slightly more complicated one. So you have, okay, let me get the mouse. So you have this header here, the top one, which is a header for the entire page. And then for part of the page, which is inside the article section, article element, which I'll explain a little bit later, you have its own header. If we look at it, it looks something like this. So this will be the header for the entire page, and here you have the header for the first section, which including frequent asked questions and a couple of bullet points. Okay, so as I explained before, there are two header elements in this document. The first one is for the entire page, and the second one is for the article. This is similar to what you mentioned before. For each of these structural elements, it can have its own, say, H1 to H6 level of headings inside. So similarly, they can have a header element of its own as well. Okay, so we covered the header. Now we're going to have a look of the navigation element, again for the header section of a page. So it's usually within the head element. And again, don't confuse that with the head section. And this really for the most important links, usually the links and to the other page on the site, and not for, say, external website. Okay, and the links in the nav element, this particular element is called nav and used to mark navigational links, and they are usually a list. Again, it just could be a few A elements or anchors, that's completely fine. Okay, so in this example, you can see inside the header, you have this element. Oops, let me see if I can get rid of. Okay, you have the nav elements, and marks inside it is a list, and each of them is a link to another page of the website. So in this case, it's an unordered list, and you could use ordered list as well, and you'll be able to change, say, the icons or symbols before each list item, and we're going to cover that. And you'll be I can't remember if we covered that in the basic lecture, but that's something you can change if you want to. So okay, and if we open up in the browser, something looks like this, which is very similar as what we saw before. Again, it doesn't quite look like a normal navigation bar on a page. That's because the CSS is not applied yet. But as I explained before, for any algorithm reading the page, they would know these are for the links or the main links to the other pages of the website. Okay, and let's next move on to the main content part. There's two more new elements for the main content. Okay, and so first is the article, and it marks part of the page content which have a similar role, just as, say, an article in a magazine, in a printed magazine. Okay, and so these are self-contained, so that means you can just copy and paste an article from one page to another, and it should still work properly. So it could be an article for a magazine. So for example, the web page or the website shows a magazine, and each article within the magazine should be marked with an article element, and could be a block entry. So if you have a block website, each entry can be marked as an article, and so on. And an article can include contents besides text. For example, you can have images, videos, etc. And this is an example. And before we look at the page, we can look at the code. So this is the header part and nav we talked about, and that's article. So in this particular case, the article covers all the main content on the page, which includes one headings, a paragraph, a second level headings, some image and paragraphs, and another section. And if we look at the actual code, it looks something like this. You have the header section with the navigation links, and you have your article, which essentially is all the text, images, and headings on the page. So this is your H1 heading, which is the title of the entire page, followed by a paragraph, and then this will be your section heading, followed by picture and some text. Similarly, another section followed by some picture and text. So overall, this one, all this forms an article similar to an article you see in a printed newspaper or magazine, and it's usually self-contained in the sense if you just take it put somewhere else, it will still work, and there's enough information people will be able to understand it. Okay, and a page may contain several elements or none at all. It really depends on the type of page. For example, for a page mainly for information or written content, then you might have article elements. But for example, if there's a page to display a game, then you might not need an article element at all. And so the blog is a good example when you can have multiple articles on the page, with each article being its one blog post. And you can have an article nested inside another one, so it's getting a little bit complicated. So you can have a sub-article inside another article. Okay, and this is one such example. So you have the article, that's the top level article, and then it has its own headings, even footers. And then you have another section inside this article. It has own headings, and then followed by its own articles. So this is like a sub-article inside it. I would say this is less common, and in many cases, just have one article would be enough. Okay, and still about the main content, and closely related article element is the section element. And just as the name indicated, this section is part of an article. So if you think of a newspaper report or a paper written or an article having a magazine, it's usually break into different sections, and the section element is designed exactly for this purpose, to mark this kind of content. And so usually you would have a heading, just as they usually have a heading for each sections. For example, if you have an article on a page, and you can have different sections, multiple sections inside it, say one section for introduction, one section for news items, one section for contact information, one section for conclusions, etc. So one articles usually have a few sections, just as you imagine when you're writing a report or paper, it's usually have a few sections, but not the other way around. It's much less common to have articles inside a section. Okay, and besides, think of this relationship between article and section as, say, the one you would see in newspaper or magazine, and the other one is how self-contained the content is. So if the information is self-contained, means you can take it from one page and put it in another, it still makes sense, then use article. And if not, that means it's a section which needs the rest of sections within the same article to make sense. Okay, and this is an example for section. Okay, so if you just look at the web page, it's not that different from the previous page we just saw. But if we look at the source code, okay, we can see here we're starting to have more markups. So we still have the article markup, just as the previous one, but here we clearly marked the sections, and within each section it has own headings and then paragraph with image and some text. So even though the page looks exactly the same as before, for an algorithm reading this page or parsing this page, it will know, okay, now this is one big article and inside there are two more sections. Each section have a heading, a picture, and some text. And this should be grouped together, where that information is previously or is otherwise not available without a section tag. Okay, now let's move on to the sidebar. And the tag is called aside. Unfortunately, it's not called a sidebar, but aside still is straightforward enough to understand. So aside is used to specify related information, but usually not directly part of the main content. So this would be a example when you have a sidebar. Okay, so when you look at this page compared to the previous one, let me close the source. You can see now we have an extra section at the bottom. And if we look at the source code, actually this is a good chance to use the developer tools, and you can choose inspect. Okay, this should be fine. I can use this. Let me make this a bit bigger so you can see. And you can easily see the structure for the entire page. The article covers everything except for the aside. And that's meant to be a sidebar on the page. As I mentioned before, specify something as aside does not change its layout. This has to be done in CSS, for example, to move it to the left of the page or to the right. And this will be covered later on, how to arrange this. And then inside the aside, it can have its own headings and its paragraph and a list, etc. And so sidebar can be used for many different things, and it could look like a pull quote, which we'll see some examples very soon. A box of links, for example, links to external websites which are related, could contain a Twitter feed or sometimes even some advertising. And it does not have always to be on the left or right either. And as I discussed earlier, and the positioning or the size of the sidebar is entirely decided by CSS. For example, this is a sidebar which contains a quote, and you can use CSS, put it in the middle of the page. And this is maybe a more common appearance of a sidebar, which on the right contains the links to a few other resources. Okay, and so this is what we just saw. When you create a side elements without any CSS, the content will just appear on the page, same as any other text or headings or pictures. And when you have the CSS applied, then you can see you can move that to the right of the main content, adding some borders or background color to make it further differentiate from the main content. Okay, so that's sidebar. And finally, we'll have a look at the footer. And so again, because this is quite common in many pages, so they create a specific element for footer. So usually it will be at the bottom of the page, and the information contained is like legal information, copyright, authorship information, etc. So again, it's related but not directly part of the main content for that particular page. And this is an example. Okay, and still the same web page. Now if you compare to the previous page, we have a little bit extra information after the credit part. It says copyright 2011, and if we look at the code, you can see we still have the same structure, having header, an article, a site, which is this part, and then the footer, which is the bottom one, and it contains a paragraph itself, which contains the copyright information. Okay, so from the visual appearance, it's very similar by just adding an extra paragraph onto the page. But for any algorithm trying to understand the page, it will understand, okay, this is a footer, and would expect the information there, say, become legal information or also contact, etc., etc. It's not part of the main page. Okay, and just as you can have a header for an article, you can also have a footer for article as well. So in this example, you can see we have an article element. Inside you can have H1, which is the heading for the article, some content inside the paragraph, and you can have its own footer. This will be different as the footer for the entire page. Again, because of these structural elements, a algorithm try to parsing or reading the page can understand the structure much better with these tags. Okay, and that's all we're going to talk about in terms of structural elements. Next, and we're going to talk about accessibility with ARIA or ARIA. So marking up your contents with these previous with the structural elements mentioned earlier actually also helps any algorithm to understand pages, including, for example, page readers. For people who are blind or vision impaired, usually they have some software tools which will read the web page out to them, and then with these structural elements, the reading or the text-to-speech algorithm will be able to understand the page much better using the information from the structural elements. And there's a standard which provides a number of ways or list of ways to help people improve the accessibility of a web page or website for people with different disabilities. Okay, and so that's called ARIA. So the WAI stands for Web Accessibility Initiative, and ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Okay, and they provide or they include some extra attributes. For example, these are called roles. So it can have banner, navigation, main, complementary, and content info. So these have been around a long time, and there's some overlap with these roles with the structural elements in HTML5. Okay, so in this example, we can see we have a page, start with a div, it has particular ID, and then you have the header for that particular page, and it says row equal to banner. So this will tell, say, the screen reader or the web page reader. So this will be the starting of the banner of the page. And similarly, the header elements will give the reader similar information. Usually the header is the top part of web page, which is not the main content. And then similarly, you would have nav elements, which will tell any reader or algorithm that's the navigation part of the web page, and the similar information can be conveyed using the role equal to navigation. Okay, and then you can have another, say, role equal to main. So that will tell the reader that's the main part or the main content of the page. And inside that, you can have other informations. And similarly, you can have role equal to complementary. So for anything that's not part of the main content. So for example, they use here in aside, which tells the algorithm or the reader that is a sidebar. Okay, and that's all we're going to cover in terms of ARIA. And if you're interested, there's more details in the textbook, and you can find lots of information online as well to how make your web page or site more accessible for people with disabilities. Okay, and next part, which is also the last part of this lecture, is about the video elements, which is new in HTML5. And I think I mentioned in week 2 lecture as well, HTML5 provides native support for video, which means the browser itself can play back certain video format. And as a result, you don't require any third-party plugins as Adobe Flash. And this is not possible in HTML4 or early versions. However, it does not support every possible video format. I think if you look at, say, some of these popular video players, for example, like VLC, they can support up to a dozen different formats. Whereas when HTML5 becomes a standard, they selected certain parts, only 3 different formats, actually 2, to make sure it works and that they think are best for play on the web. Okay, and there are over a dozen commonly used video formats, and we will not discuss any particular of these in this module. And if you want to include in these any videos on a web page, you have to make sure they has to be converted into the format that's supported by the browser or the HTML5 standard. Okay, so the format that HTML5 supports, including the MP4, or it has a formal name called H.264, and this is a proprietary standard and it's not free. Anyone wants to be able to use that or play the files or the videos encoded in this format has to pay for that. And there's also OGG and WebM. So these 2 are actually quite similar, and also they share the property they're free and open source. So anyone can create a player and be able to decode or play back videos in these formats. Okay, and not all browsers support all 3, mostly because of commercial reasons. For example, the Chrome, the Firefox, and Opera has better support for OGG and WebM, whereas Internet Explorer and Safari has better support for MP4. Okay, so this is not absolute, but the main reason is because The owner of Internet Explorer, which is Microsoft, and the owner of Safari, which is Apple, they are part of the group which owns the copyrights or intellectual property of MP4 standard, whereas Chrome, Mozilla, and Opera, they don't have a share in the MP4 standard, so they are more pro-open standard. Okay, and here we have the Chrome in bracket. In a sense, Chrome itself supports MP4, but not the Chromium, which is open source basis of Chrome. Okay, so things get a little bit complicated here. Most people would think Chrome is open source, but itself is actually not. The open source version is called Chromium, which shares the most features of Chrome and is the basis where Chrome is built on top. So once a new version of Chromium becomes available, Google would add extra info or extra features or priority information, and code into it and package it as Chrome. So this is including support for MP4 playback, etc. Okay. Okay, so as a result, general recommendations, or sometimes you want to make sure it works well, you may have to include both versions, MP4 and OGG WebM, to make sure your videos can play back in all browsers. But I think for this module, we will mostly just test everything on Chrome, so you can use any of these formats and which will be working fine. Okay, and to add video to a web page is quite simple, and you just use the video tag, and you need to put the source or where the video file is. And if you remember the discussion we had earlier on about the URLs, this means there's a file called the paddlesteamer.webm, which is located exactly the same directory as where this HTML page is. The HTML page contains this video element. You can also add more controls, for example, play, pause, or even sound volume control by adding the control attributes into the video tag, the video element. And similarly, there's autoplay attributes, and which means when the page is loaded and the video would start playing automatically without pressing the play button. And this can be a bit annoying and quite often used by advertisement. So it will play automatically when you load a page. And the browsers now, like Chrome, would build in features which allows you to stop these videos from automatically play after loading a page. Okay, and so this is an example of a video with the control and autoplay attribute. Okay, as you can see, it started playing. It didn't start playing automatically. And I think that's because the settings in Chrome now stopped from autoplaying. But you can see these are the controls that you would have. And you wouldn't have these if you don't have the control attributes. You can control whether it's sound or not, whether it's full screen or not, and potentially other. Okay, you can also download the source file as well. If we look at the source code, and so that's the other features that might be useful. So if I want to know where the code for particularly on the page is, I just need to click here, and then you allow it to select an element. For example, I can select this particular element, and this HTML code is now highlighted in the browser. So in the source code panel, make it a little bit bigger. Okay, it tells you where the file is, and I want control and autoplay. And let me see if I can change the settings to make the autoplay actually happens. Autoplay sync. Okay, maybe. Let's try here. Nope. Okay. There should be a setting somewhere which will allow, maybe let's say playback. Nope. Or video. Nope. Okay. Anyway, so with autoplay by default, it should be, or previously, it will just play the video automatically without you have to press anything. Let's get back to the slides. Then you can also do looping as well, which means once the video finished, it will start from the beginning again. So here there are a few other things that you can specify in the video element. You have seen the source, the autoplay, the controls. You can also mute. That means by default it will not have any sound. You can have a poster, which will be the image that's displayed before the video is played. You can set the width and height, just as you can set an image. And finally, you can say whether you want to preload or not. That means in caching. For example, when the page is first loaded, you can cache in certain part of the video, so it will play straight away when the user clicks the play button. Okay, you can specify a post image. That is what displayed before a video started to play. And otherwise, it will just display the first frame of the video, which is not necessarily what you want. Okay, if we look at the example here, okay, and we check the code, and let's select, or can just, I think it will be fairly simple. You can see this one specifies an image, which is what will be used before the video was played. You can see it's quite different from the first frame of the video itself. Let's say here, and we refresh the page. So it's auto-playing now this time. And if it does not autoplay, it will display just the first frame of the video. And it might not always be the image you wanted for people how to understand what the video is. Okay, as I mentioned before, it is possible to stop the video from preload if you know it's less likely to be used or be played, and it can be costly when you say out about using a mobile phone watching the page. You don't want to download all the videos on a page if it's unlikely you will watch them. Okay, and you can set the preload attributes to metadata. So this is only retrieving basic information about dimensions, length, etc., and not the video itself. If we look at this example, okay, and we check the code, this will be in the body. Okay, so it will say preload equal to none. That means this video will not preload. So you can see there's no caching indicated here. And if you want to play, it will have to load from the very beginning. which is still quite quick in this case. Whereas if you look at this one here, if we refresh, sorry, this is because it's already loaded, so it doesn't show. If I can force it to reload the entire thing, okay. Yeah, because this is quite slow, so you don't. So this is quite a small file, so you don't really see. Yeah, the preload actually already load everything. So difficult to see. Okay, as I mentioned before, not all browsers support all the file or the both file formats, and sometimes you have to including two formats just to make sure the video will play in all browsers. And this is how you do it. So you can have the video tag, and you have source, and in the source you can specify different file format, and then the browser will automatically pick the one which it can play. And you can even put a message, say sorry, your browser doesn't support the video element. For an old browsers which does not even support the video element, then for those it will not be playback any of these either of the format. And you could also say providing a download link to the video files itself. In this case, for the browser which will not be able to play the video, the user has option to download the video file and open it with a media player outside the browser. Okay, okay, so this is example, and we can just do an inspection, and we select the video element itself, and that's the code for this particular video, and you can see it provides a few different versions. So you can say the source file, the first format is in MP4, and in WebM, and in OGB. And it even has a fallback to Flash if the browser does not support one of these available formats. Okay, and in your coursework, if you need to adding videos to your page, you should using the video tag, not the code that you would copy from the YouTube website. Okay, so that's it.